Right, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Come on then. Come on. Right, you stay. Stay. Sit. Stay, sit. Stay. Leave. Stay. Stay. That's it. Leave it. Go. Oi, wait. Oi. Get out of it. Get out of it. Sit. Sit. Now get it. Now, how quick can you do it this time, Greedy Guts? I know some of you who saw this video before saw how quickly she did it. She seems to be learning quite well. Whenever there's treats involved, innit? Hey! Yes, that's it, I'm filming you. I'm filming you. Come on then, smart ass. She's getting big, and she's getting clever. Aren't you? And there we go. Last one, that's it. Greedy, ain't you? Greedy Guts. Hey, Callie, say high five. There we go. Well, hello there, how is everyone? I hope you're all well on this terrific, no, that's Tuesday, terrible Thursday. You know what we think of Thursdays. It's just that day when you just don't really know what's going on. But anyway, I do know one thing that's going on. You're looking amazing again. And we've only got one day, technically, of the week left. And then we've got the weekend. And what you just witnessed there was a dog being far too smart for its own good. And talking about people who are too smart for their own good, is that Bryan Kohberger. As, look, due to the fact that this case has kind of ground to a halt and we're waiting for this postponed hearing, we're going to start looking at some other bits and pieces over the next few days unless something, jumps out and we need to speak about it. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up, summarise where we are and where I feel we should potentially be, and ask the question as to why we're not where we really should be if things are the way in which people would like us to perceive that they are. And what do I mean by that? Because that even confused the fuck out of me. Now look, we've got Bryan Kohberger currently sitting in a cage awaiting trial, having had to waive his rights to a speedy trial because the prosecution were holding back on giving the defence team stuff that they needed in order to get their shit together. So when this all goes to court, they can say, this is what we've been given, this is our response to the questions that are undoubtedly going to come up. But the bare bones of it all is they've got a knife sheath with DNA on it, they've got a car, and they've got a witness. And those three things, generally, you would think would be enough. Absolutely enough. We're seeing cases being solved left, right and centre, cold cases where they go back into it, they dig up some DNA, and lo and behold, someone goes to jail or prison here in the UK in the event that that DNA is to prove that someone else was there. We've got people who have been incarcerated when DNA has come along later on down the line and proven that the person who's been incarcerated, it weren't actually them, it was this other guy, John, and John's DNA was there all along. So when you think that you've got a crime with a knife sheath and you've got DNA that supposedly belongs to Bryan Kohberger, this should be a slam dunk deal. And when you pair that with the fact that apparently we have his car caught on camera outside the property with which this crime was committed, and you've got an eyewitness on top of that that places his bushy eyebrows at least inside the house, again, this should be a slam dunk. So why isn't it? And what makes me think it's not? Because of this. I feel that if this was indeed an absolute slam dunk, the defence team wouldn't have had to have asked for discovery 7 times. That's why. That's one of the biggest things. I feel that if they had a slam dunk case, we've got your guy, we've got his car, we've got someone who saw him there you go, build your case, you ain't really got anywhere to go. This would be, that's the way I would have expected this to go, don't you? Are you in agreement? If you're not, let me know down below why you think that there could be difficulties and whether they match why I think there could be difficulties. because in a second I'm going to tell you why I do believe that there could be difficulties in it. And will those difficulties end up potentially seeing, when we do eventually see this hearing, seeing Bryan Kohberger walk his way out of this case? And there are some scary things about that as well, which we're going to touch on, which we have touched on in the past, but I just want to ram that home so people fully understand. So again, let's recap. We've got a car, we've got a man's eyebrows at least, and we've got DNA on a knife sheath. So let's just pull those little three things, tug them at the seams and see what happens. Now, the knife sheath itself. The knife sheath is not a complete slam dunk. And why isn't it? Because the type of DNA that's on there, which obviously belongs to Bryan Kohberger, even though there was a convoluted way of getting to it and all this, ultimately the DNA that's on there is supposedly Bryan Kohberger's. The issue is how the DNA got on to the knife sheath, and more importantly, when did it get on there? Because it would appear that the DNA must have got on the knife sheath prior to it entering into the property. And how do we know that? Because we know that if it would have got onto that knife sheath inside that property, then you would expect there to be other things with DNA on there as well. So it would make you think that if this was Bryan, for instance, or whoever did this, they've gone in there and they have pretty much covered themselves for a transferal of their DNA into the property, because they haven't really found anything else that belongs to Bryan anyway, and that's the important thing. And we're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to come back to that in a second. So Bryan Kohberger's DNA, the only DNA of him that was found was on the knife sheath. And again, the important thing is, when did the DNA get on the knife sheath? Because again, I would bet my bollocks to a barn dance that if he indeed transferred his DNA onto said knife sheath, it was prior to the night that this happened, and at the very least before that knife sheath ended up in 1122 King Road. So that leaves two arguments then. That is, when did it go on there, and had that knife sheath then been passed on to someone else, or did somebody come into contact with Bryan Kohberger and then come into contact with the knife sheath? All these things, however slim you want to say the possibility of this happening is, it is a potential. And with it being a potential, you have reasonable doubt. So the knife sheath, although some people may feel it's a slam dunk, it comes with reasonable doubt because of the fact that the DNA must have been on the knife sheath prior to it entering in the property. And as far as we're aware, there is no other DNA samples from Bryan Kohberger apart from what is on the knife sheath. Are you with me so far? And that brings us to the car. So the car situation. Why isn't the car situation a slam dunk? Well, as far as we are, from the general public, we do not know if that car does genuinely belong to Bryan Kohberger, unless they have a video image of that car alongside the rear plate that, beyond a reasonable doubt, says that that is indeed his car, and it's not on a camera far away, but a camera within the vicinity of 1122 King Road. Then again, you cannot be 100% sure the car is his. And why, I hear you ask? Because, as stated by law enforcement, there is 22,000 registered white Hyundai Elantras around this area. I'm not saying on the street, but around this area. What they had to pull from the pool of was 22,000 white Hyundai Elantras, which means that there is, albeit it could be as slim as you like, there is a chance that where one car could have been seen on a camera, it doesn't mean that it was the same car seen on this camera here. There could have been a point where you are seeing two different cars on two different cameras, despite how that route makes you feel that they're the same. It doesn't necessarily mean they are the same. And in order to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they are indeed the same car caught on every single camera, and it is indeed Bryan Kohberger, there has to be more. There has to be a license plate, or there has to be an image that clearly shows Bryan Kohberger inside that vehicle. I'm just saying. And then we have a witness that places Bryan Kohberger inside the property. But what we've got to remember here is originally law enforcement, James Fry himself, so the captain of all this, had stated that he hadn't said that these people, the surviving roommates, were witnesses. In fact, he made it sound like that they hadn't seen or heard anything. And I wonder whether he was actually utilising that to try and explain away why the 911 call had taken so long to be made. Trying to say perhaps that they hadn't seen or heard a thing, and they woke up way after all this had happened, long gone, done, and lo and behold, this is where we find ourselves. But later on, one of those survivor members becomes a witness and gives I was going to say, she explains exactly what Bryan Kohberger looks like, but they don't. They give a very, very generic overview of what they saw. Someone dressed in black. You could imagine that anybody entering a house at night to commit a nefarious act, to rob them, to attack someone, to steal someone, is going to wear black. They're not going to go in there wearing pink Bermuda shorts and a yellow fucking vest, are they? They're gonna wear black. So that's anything. Bushy eyebrows, a female looking at a male face that's got a mask on, where you've got the eyes are the only real thing you see, depending on how any light is cast on there, which there obviously was some light on there because they've managed to see the eyes, but that is going to cast a shadow on the face, and anything around the eyes is going to make that look like there's potentially bushy eyebrows. So, you know, you can look at pictures of Bryan Kohberger and question, does Bryan Kohberger have bushy eyebrows, or does he have a pronounced area of like a bulbous part above his eyes that would cast a shadow and make them look bushy? But the height as well, 5'10", 5'10"-ish, I think they said, and we're talking about someone who themselves is fairly tall. I'd certainly say for a female above average in height, but it would appear that Bryan Kohberger is in fact more likely around 6'3" when you compare him to every single other person that we get to see him standing around. It would make you think that this person would potentially have seen Bryan Kohberger as tall and at least given 6 foot or 6 foot plus, taking their own height into consideration. So look, the three main things, the car, the knife sheath and the witness, are all things that come with a reasonable doubt. They do come with a reasonable doubt, and these things that come with a reasonable doubt can't exist for there to be a conviction that will ultimately lead to potentially the death penalty. There cannot be any room for doubt. Every single thing that happens, it has to happen for, you know, how can I say? Like I say, there just can't be any movement in it. The square peg has got to very tightly fit the square hole to see all this put away. And there are just so many things that aren't quite as clear. Yes, we have got loads of stories in the background, potential incel stuff, these harsh marker things where it says that Bryan Kohberger potentially had problems with females, when in reality he just fucking had problem with marking work and seemingly had this very high standard that he wanted people to achieve. Maybe he was basing that on himself and how he wanted to, but it rubbed people up the wrong way, caused issues, and so on and so forth. And, you know, we've heard the story from where Bryan Kohberger potentially put cameras into someone's house in order to spy on them. And then we've got the other version of that where some female has gone to Bryan because she felt that there was something happening in her home and she asked him for help and assistance. So we can spin anything. The only things that truly matter are what we see in the court documentation. The court documentation. Brian Kohberger didn't have any IDs that belonged to any of the victims. For those of you who still think that that's a thing, that isn't. The fact that Brian Kohberger was sacked and, you know, who knows? We do not know 100% whether Brian Kohberger was sacked or not. The phone data, we don't know. There is nothing conclusive about the phone data. If you go through the PCA and read it closely, there is nothing in that PCA that says that the phones place Brian Kohberger in Moscow, Idaho at 1122 King Road at the time with which these crimes are committed. It can certainly say that Brian Kohberger's phone was turned off or not transmitting to a tower, but also in that PCA, they are stating that the phone is pinging in the area and they don't believe that Brian Kohberger's there. So by their own admission, they are saying that phone data, the pinging, is not going to be accurate representation of where someone is at any given time. And this, if he got given the death penalty based on the phone being turned off and not saying that he was in a specific place, that would be the first time that that ever happened, if that was the sole piece of information that did it. So there is a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff that still has to be answered. But look, Brian could walk. Brian could walk from this, and it's either going to mean that an innocent man has walked, which is great, which is absolutely fantastic. If an innocent man, truly innocent man, walks out of this and it's proven that he is indeed innocent, then great, fine. But it does then mean that someone else is out there who did do this, and then we're back to the drawing board and we've got to find out what's going on. And there's going to be some difficult questions that people are going to have to answer. Who are people going to be upset when people start pointing the fingers and pulling them over the coals? Because it's either going to be someone who we've already seen, we've already spoken about, or it's going to be someone completely out of this area who we don't know, a complete and utter stranger, or it's going to be, like I say, someone who we are potentially already familiar with. Or Brian Kohberger did it, and the fact that this wasn't handled right, perhaps the DNA on the knife sheath just wasn't obtained legally. We don't know that. But it would just explain why the prosecution have been so difficult when it comes to handing over stuff that the defence team do need. Regardless of how people feel about that, that is what a fair system does. A fair system is when the prosecution gets their evidence together and they build a case against somebody and they give the defence that information and say, this is our case and we'll see you in court. And we're going to have a chat about it. And that's it. If it doesn't work that way, then you're going down the route of trial by ambush, or worse, and that is that there's things that are being hidden. Exculpatory evidence, for instance, which we have in the background still got a massive question mark hanging over the head of one of the surviving roommates, Bethany Funk, and the exculpatory evidence. Is there truly some exculpatory evidence there? Who knows? But we have got a court hearing in a few, is it 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time? And hopefully we will get more answers. But until then, until something happens, until some new document drops, or we have to debunk some myth that comes out, we'll be looking at some other things. But until then, have a fantastic, fantastic rest of your Thursday, and I shall catch you all in video 2 later today.